I never thought my own daughter would be the one to break me. At 60 years old, I had endured life's storms, buried a husband, raised children with trembling hands, and built a home so beautiful that neighbors stopped to admire the roses blooming at the gates. But that day, when my daughter wrinkled her nose, waved her hand dramatically, and said in front of everyone, "Your room stinks, Mom," I felt something inside me crack, like an old porcelain vase finally giving way under the weight of years. I stayed silent. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. But inside, I decided it was time to remind her who I was. She thought she could humiliate me? She thought I would stay quiet forever? No. I was about to teach her a lesson she would never forget. And that is how I came to sell the mansion, our mansion, while she was away. My name is Eleanor Hart. I was born in 1963 in a small town where people lived with pride even when they had little. My parents were farmers. They taught me that dignity mattered more than wealth. My father always said, "A woman's silence is not weakness, it is her strength before the storm." When I was 22, I married Richard, a man everyone envied. He was handsome, driven, and came from a wealthy family. Together, we built a life people dreamed of. The mansion we lived in wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was a symbol of years of sweat, sacrifices, and love. Every chandelier, every carved door, every painting on the walls had a story. We had 2 children, my son, Daniel, and my daughter, Caroline. Daniel, my firstborn, inherited his father's charm but also his father's arrogance. Caroline, my sweet little girl, was different, at least in the beginning. She clung to me, adored me, and said she would never leave my side. But life is cruel in the way it twists love into something unrecognizable. Richard died suddenly when I was 52. A heart attack. One moment he was reading the newspaper, the next he was gone. The mansion became my prison of grief. Daniel moved abroad, chasing business. Caroline stayed, but not because she cared. No, she stayed because the mansion meant money, and money meant comfort. Slowly, her respect for me faded. She spoke to me like I was a burden, an old relic she was forced to tolerate. She brought her friends into my house, laughed loudly in the living room while I sat quietly upstairs, and rolled her eyes whenever I reminded her of manners. But the worst part? She forgot who I was. She forgot the sacrifices, the nights I stayed awake sewing her dresses, the meals I skipped so she could eat, the way I held her through every fever. She forgot. And then came that day. It was a Sunday afternoon. Caroline had invited a few friends from her corporate world. They arrived in flashy cars, dripping with arrogance, perfume strong enough to choke the air. They sat in my living room, talking about stock markets and vacations in Paris. I stayed upstairs, in my bedroom, away from their noise. But I heard Caroline's voice calling, "Mom, come down. They want to see you." Reluctantly, I went downstairs. My knees ached, but I held my head high. When I entered, her friends smiled politely, though I could see the flicker of judgment in their eyes. My old-fashioned dress. My gray hair. And then Caroline said it. She wrinkled her nose, waved her hand dramatically, and said, "Ugh, Mom, your room stinks. It smells like old age." Her friends chuckled awkwardly. My heart stopped. I wanted the ground to open and swallow me. I looked at her. My daughter. The child I gave life to. And she looked back with annoyance, as if I were an embarrassment she had to tolerate. I stayed silent. My father's words echoed in my mind, "A woman's silence is her strength before the storm." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the walls. My heart ached, but not from sadness. From anger. From betrayal. And then the thought came to me, clear, sharp, and undeniable. Revenge. Caroline and Daniel believed the mansion was their future inheritance. They had even begun discussing renovations, as if I were already gone. I overheard Caroline telling a friend, "Once Mom passes, I'll remodel the house. Maybe turn it into a modern villa." That was when I knew exactly what to do. Over the next weeks, I began planning. I contacted an old lawyer friend, Mr. Jacobs, who had handled Richard's estate. I told him I wanted to sell the mansion. He raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure, Eleanor? This house is worth millions." "I am sure," I said firmly. He handled the paperwork discreetly. I insisted it must remain secret. Caroline could never know. Meanwhile, I played my role perfectly. I cooked her meals, smiled when she laughed, even apologized when she was cold. She thought I had accepted my place as a silent, weak-old woman. But inside, I was counting the days. 2 months later, the sale was finalized. A wealthy couple who loved antiques and history bought it. They paid in full. The money transferred directly into my account. The timing was perfect. Caroline had planned a weekend getaway with her friends. She left Friday evening, tossing her bag over her shoulder, kissing the air in my direction without touching me, saying, "Don't wait up, Mom. Try not to stink up the place while I'm gone." I watched her leave. My lips curled into a smile. As soon as her car disappeared, I began packing. I packed my clothes, my photo albums, my jewelry, the letters Richard had written me, and the quilt my mother made. Everything else, the furniture, the chandeliers, the carpets, I left. They belonged to the new owners now. When the truck arrived to move my things, I felt lighter than I had in years. The mansion no longer chained me. It was no longer a prison. It was my weapon. By Saturday night, I was gone. On Sunday evening, Caroline returned. I wasn't there to see it, but the new owners told me what happened. She walked in with her friends, laughing, holding shopping bags. She called out, "Mom?" But instead of me, she found strangers. The couple stood in the living room, smiling politely. "This is our house now," they told her. Her scream echoed so loud, they said, it startled the neighbors. I moved into a small seaside cottage 2 towns away. It wasn't as grand as the mansion, but it was mine. Peaceful. Filled with salt air and seagulls instead of arrogance and mockery. Caroline called me dozens of times. At first angry, then desperate. "How could you do this to me? Where am I supposed to live?" "You humiliated me," I said calmly. "You forgot respect. You thought the mansion was yours, but it was mine. And now it belongs to people who value it more than you ever did." She cried, begged, even threatened. But I didn't waver. For once, I held the power. Daniel eventually called too. "Mom, you shouldn't have done this. It wasn't fair." "Life isn't fair," I replied. "I gave you both everything. All I asked for was respect. And when I didn't get it, I chose myself." For months, they avoided me. But slowly, Caroline began visiting. Not for the mansion, but for me. She came to my cottage, knocked gently, and apologized. Real apologies, eyes wet, voice trembling. It was then I realized my revenge had worked. Not just because I took away what she valued most, but because I forced her to remember what truly mattered, me, her mother. I didn't forgive her immediately. Forgiveness isn't cheap. It took time. But eventually, I let her sit beside me on the porch, watching the waves crash against the shore. "Mom," she whispered one evening, "I was cruel to you. I don't know why. Maybe I thought wealth gave me the right. But I see now, it was you who gave me everything. Not the house. Not the money. You." Tears welled in my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt like a mother again. I leaned back, breathed in the salty air, and smiled. Because revenge, when done right, doesn't just destroy. Sometimes, it heals. The end.